Welcome to Dawn of the New Earth. Today, we're talking about the 7 steps of inner alchemy, how to transform lead into gold. That's what we're talking about today. Now, of course, we know that this is about inner alchemy. It's not about literally turning metal into gold. It's rather purifying the soul to reach higher and higher levels of transformation and consciousness, and ultimately to enact your will into reality. This is very powerful stuff. And remember, all this is about building a symbolic system to be able to communicate with your unconscious. And today, we're going to take a look at the 7 steps of inner alchemy and the planets and the metals associated with these steps and what it means. So last week, we talked about the different elements that are used in alchemy, and I'll show you that on screen for those of you who perhaps missed it. This is what we talked about last week. We took a look at the 4 elements, the 3 primes, the 2 principles, and the 1 thing. So we got kind of an overview of the different things that we will be working with within alchemy. And today we're going to be taking a look at the actual 7 steps themselves, and we're going to see that these steps are hidden in the symbolism of the this alchemical diagram and many alchemical diagrams. You might even see you might even see the sun and the moon here. You can see sulfurs up here. We're going to get to all this. And we're also going to see how it connects to a symbol that you might be very familiar with, which is the medical symbol, or the caduceus, which is has alchemical symbolism. As you can see, it's very, very similar to this symbol here. So that's what we're talking about today. It's going to be great. It's going to be really interesting. And we have a lot of very cool things to explore as well. We have the different alchemical tools that we are going to be working with as we explore the metals and the planets and how it relates to the steps that we are talking about today. So it's going to be a good one. Now, before we get started, I just want to remind you that, hey, if you enjoy my work, please consider becoming a member right here on YouTube by hitting the join button, or on Patreon, and you'll get access to a lot of great stuff. Remember, anyone who's a member at any level gets access to all my alchemy notes that I'm making for each of these videos. So I'm making a very concise and powerful summary for each of these videos that I'm making that will form a very powerful alchemical handbook eventually. So make sure that you download those and take a look at those. They are really key to understanding all this stuff really simply. Also, I want to remind you that my books are available now. I have 5 books out. I recommend going with book 5 if this is the sort of thing that you're interested in. So book 5 is all about alchemy, but I don't use the word alchemy at all. I don't use any alchemical symbolism. It's all in terms of psychology. And in the Neogenian system, this is known as inner star actualization, hyper-awareness, and will forming, to actualize your inner star, your divine eternal self, as well as reaching the highest levels of consciousness and enacting your will into reality. So this is an excellent companion to understanding the process of alchemy in a very rational and logical way, whereas today we're exploring it in a very symbolic and an intuitive way, because we're about making that connection between the mind and the unconscious. Anyway, if you don't know where to start, you can also start with Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. We're going to see that this can also be used as a supplement for the first stage in inner alchemy. If just go with it, you'll see it's all going to make sense. It's all going to come together and it's going to be good. So let's get started. Like I said, make sure you hit like and subscribe, become a member, check out my books, all that. All the links are in the description of, they're in the description of this video. So I'm running out of room here. Okay, so as I said, we have to remember, what the heck are we even doing here? We are making a symbolic map of the psyche. We're learning a set of symbolism to be able to communicate with our unconscious mind. That's what we're doing. That's the purpose here. So it's not about literally turning metal into gold. It's about learning a system of symbolism that helps us tap into our unconscious, because the unconscious does not communicate through words. It communicates through symbols. So that's what we're doing. So we're going to be taking a look at the 7 steps of alchemy, and I'll tell you what the 7 steps are right now, and then we'll get into what what they actually are. There's calcination, dissolution, separation, conjunction, fermentation, distillation, and coagulation. So let's take a look at each one step by step and see what it is that it means. Okay, so let me see what we can do here. All right, so step number one is calcination. Now, calcination is, let me see. Calcination is associated with the planet Saturn, which is associated with lead. This is a cube of lead. And it's associated with the element of fire. So these are the symbols that we are going to be working with for the first stage of inner alchemy, which is calcination, which is related to the planet Saturn, the metal lead, and the element of fire. Now, what does all this have to do with anything? What is this actually about? So, calcination is a fiery process. It's a burning process. And we can see that this stage is illustrated in this diagram here. You can see down here, this is fire. And I know it's a little hard to see. I'll include a better image of this in my alchemy notes. But right up here is a triangle. It's an upwards facing triangle, which of course is what we associate with fire. So this first step is illustrated right here through the fire depicted and the upwards facing triangle. So what this is, okay, when we're taking a look at these particular items here and the process of calcination, this is about realizing that you aren't your persona or your ego. In other words, it's about destroying and burning away all the aspects of you that aren't you. It's about removing all societal influences, all conditioning systems, all belief systems, all egoic beliefs, burning those away so that what remains you'll be able to work with what is actually you and not a product of something else. And so the reason why this is associated with lead is because lead is very heavy. It's resistant to change. Saturn represents this as well. It can represent stability, but it can also represent getting like stuck in a routine. And so what we're trying to do is apply fire to the process to help transform this state of lead, this state of being stuck, this state of being trapped in an unmoving, unchanging structure. So what this step involves is burning away false identities to reveal that you are more than your social roles and conditioned beliefs. It's about realizing that the ego and persona are masks, and the fire is the destruction of the false, making way for a deeper realization, ultimately, that you are the inner star. So this is all a process to actualize your higher self and your will into reality. That's what this is ultimately about, reaching higher levels of consciousness to reach your higher self, which in the Neogenian system, we call the inner star. Your true self, your soul, what you actually are, is called the inner star. It's not your ego, it's not your persona, it's not your body, it's the true you, your inner star. So this is about making way for destroying, by destroying those old limiting conditioning systems that hold you back. Now, in terms of like inner star actualization, what this entails is realizing that you aren't your ego. If you want to go further than that, Neogenesis is a great supplement because Neogenesis is the whole book is about destroying all your conditioned beliefs so that you are free to create your true self. But in terms of, just sticking to the Psychogenesis book, you can understand this as destroying your or the belief that you are your ego. You're not. Now, there's a very important thing that I want to make very clear here. in a lot of these systems, right? If you look up alchemy or you look up any spiritual system, not any, but a lot of them, you're going to find that a lot of them are about destroy your ego, destroy your ego, destroy your ego, destroy your ego. If you look at the different steps of alchemy, it's going to constantly talk about different ways to destroy your ego. But here, this is critical and this is key. You don't want to destroy your ego. Your ego is important, but you don't want to identify with your ego. It's not who you actually are. So you don't want to necessarily destroy your ego. You want to make sure that you don't identify with it. You don't want to get rid of it. So the ego is a tool, just like a fork is a tool for eating spaghetti. You want to be able to use your fork to eat the spaghetti. If you destroy your fork, you're going to have a really messy time. But if you identify with your fork, that's kind of weird. It's not who you are, it's your tool. So who you are, what you truly are, is the inner star. Your ego is just the center of your field of consciousness. It's the center of the field of your awareness. So you can think of the ego as being like the little self and the higher self being the higher self, the full self, the unfiltered self, the inner star. And so in Jungian psychology, it's said that the ego is the servant of the higher self. So that's kind of what you need to look at it as. That this is just like your body isn't. You wouldn't want to identify with your body. A lot of people do, but a lot of people go, "Oh, I am my body." You're not your body. Well, just like you aren't your body, you aren't your ego, and you don't want to identify with your ego, or else you're going to have a lot of problems. But we are. Let's move on, because, like I said, we're going to be doing a full breakdown of each of these steps in subsequent videos. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to get through all of the steps today. All right. So this is the first step, calcination. It's calcination, which is related to Saturn, lead, and fire. One important distinction to remember here is that these particular correspondences means that these are associated with the step of calcination. It doesn't necessarily mean that fire is related to Saturn. It's not. Usually Earth is related to Saturn. So it's important to remember that these things are what fall under the umbrella of calcination. They may or may not be related. Obviously, the planets and the metals are, but as far as the elements go, this is driving the change. This is the state of being stuck in that very restrictive, heavy, unchanging state. The fire of transformation is being applied to burn away everything that is not you, so that you can become transformed. So what happens next, and the next phase, is the phase of dissolution. This is represented by the planet Saturn, the metal of tin, and the element of water. All right, so this was calcination. This is now dissolution. We have Jupiter, tin, and water. What is all this about? What does this mean? So after you go through the process of burning away everything that is not you, realizing that you aren't your ego, you aren't your body, you aren't your persona, that these things aren't you, what happens is you get thrown into a state where you're exploring, you're trying to figure out who you really are now. You burned away everything that isn't you. So you're trying to figure, okay, well, who am I then? What am I actually? And this entails understanding your unconscious mind, all the parts of you that have been left in the dark, repressed, all the parts that aren't in your consciousness. It's all within your unconscious. And this is also related to something known as the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul can be a very difficult time because you're realizing, holy shit, everything that I thought I knew, everything that I thought that I was, it's not true. That's not who I am. These elements aren't true. So it can be a difficult time known as the dark night of the soul, where you can feel very like a tendency to withdraw from the world and keep to yourself, and difficulty like understanding what you are and what reality is because everything has been completely shattered. So you're in that shattered state, but you're also now starting to get in touch with who you are. You're trying to discover who you are. And so the reason why here that we have the element of water is that we are diving into the depths, the waters of the unconscious, okay? So dissolution is essentially about surrendering to the deep waters of the unconscious. It's the phase of confronting your repressed thoughts, traumas, and archetypes. And it's where you'll start to be introduced to the different aspects of you, the shadow self, the mirror self, and the power self, these hidden parts of you that have been lost in the darkness, in the dark waters. You're going to start to get familiar with their existence as you dive into these dark waters. And this can, like I said, manifest as the dark night of the soul, which, it can result in turmoil and existential questions where you start to explore the hidden aspects of yourself. And so what about the element of tin? Well, tin is a lot more flexible than lead. Tin is a lot more flexible, and because it is a lot more flexible, it allows you to explore those unconscious aspects of yourself. But one interesting thing about tin is if you have a sheet of tin and you flex it really fast, it makes a thundering noise, kind of like how you would use sheets of tin in old movies to make a thundering noise. So it can represent the dark and thunderous night. So it represents all these different aspects. You're more flexible now. You're not as rigid as you were, but you have that dark, thunderous descent into the unconscious where you are to explore the inner aspects of yourself. And that is the step of dissolution. Now, because the next step is called separation. So, I'm sorry. Before we get into that, I want to point out. So remember here we had. Let me see if I can actually make some notes on this that you guys will be able to see. Let me see if that'll actually work, or if you guys can see that or not. I'm not sure. Let me see if I do perhaps a red pen. Okay. You guys, it's a little hard. It's a little hard to see. But right in here, this is where we had everything related to, we have the fire on the bottom and then the triangle. Okay. Now we're talking about dissolution, and you can see dissolution here. We have this glass that is being boiled and heated up by the fire. All right. So in here we have the water that is being boiled by the fire. So that's the next step that's occurring in this diagram or symbolic piece of art that represents the process of inner alchemy. So I just wanted to point that out so we remember where we are here. And let's go back to this. So we went from calcination to dissolution. Now we are in the process of separation. Separation is related to Mars, which is related to iron. And calcination is, or I'm sorry, not calcination. Separation is related to air. Okay. So when we are talking about separation, which is Mars, iron, and air, what is this step about? Well, what have you done before? First of all, you've burned away all your egoic structures, all the parts of you that aren't you. Then you've sort of dived into the deep unconscious of the mind to explore yourself, burned it away, dived into the watery depths of your mind. Now you're going to come up for air. You're on fire, so you're like, holy shit, I'm on fire. I'm going to jump into some water. You found yourself underwater, but it's, you can't tell which way's up, which way's down. It's confusing. Now you're going to come up for air with clarity. So before, you were just getting kind of aware of the fact that you have unconscious structures. Like, oh, I have a shadow self. I have a mirror self. I have a power self. Separation, specifically, is about consciously identifying and integrating your shadow self. So it requires courage and clarity, because your shadow self can be scary, to confront these hidden parts of yourself. So iron and or Mars is often associated with willpower, will, and transformation as well. And so you have this willful iron and clarity. And so remember that air is associated with the intellect. So this is about the aspect of integrating your shadow where you have to engage in intellectual analysis. Here you were just sort of diving into the waters of the unconscious and getting acquainted with your unconscious aspects. Now you're in the process of integration. You're like, okay, how am I going to deal with my shadow self? How am I going to deal with these aspects of myself that I have discovered, particularly the shadow? And so you're using the air, the intellect, the clarity, coupled with the will of Mars and iron, to be able to identify and confront the hidden, darker aspects of yourself. All right, as you start to become whole, Mars provides the willpower to cut through all the denial and the power that you need to integrate these repressed parts, ultimately allowing yourself to become whole here. Okay, so let's take a look at this diagram here. So here's the interesting thing. This is where it gets a little more abstract, because let's see how I can do this. You see that we have the fire down here, and then when we have the water up here. Well, what happens when you start to boil the water? You start to get vapor. You start to get water, you start to get vapor, you start to get the air, the element of air, and it results in separation. But here's the idea. Now, where does the separation come in? Well, you can see that now you have two serpents. You have two separate things. And this is also the point where the sun and the moon really coincide. You have the sun and the moon over here. So you have this process of separation, but you might think, well, wait a minute. Integration, how does that work? Why is that associated with separation? So in the alchemical process, when you say separation, it's not like, oh, I'm going to separate this and get rid of it, because that's not how you integrate your shadow self. You separate by meaning like, I'm going to look at it and examine it, then transform it, then recombine it. So you see, that's what you're sort of doing. You're separating out the impurity, transforming it so it is pure, and then integrating it again. That would be taking a look at your shadow. I'm gonna do a quick example, because remember, this is just an overview, but a quick example would be like an anger. Let's say you have anger as part of your shadow. You realize, oh shit, I have an anger problem. You make that realization. And so now you need to transform it. How are you going to transform it? Well, you need to integrate it, which means you need to deal with it in some way. Multiple ways you could do this. It could be, getting a therapist to work through it. It could be about sublimating these energies to something that is productive, like maybe creating art or creating music or joining, like an activist group that you care about. You're using that power to help transform your life rather than having it being a limiting aspect of yourself. Okay. So that's where you get the aspect of separation in this process, because you're separating these quote unquote impurities, and you're examining them with your air, with your intellect, consciously making the commitment to transform them, reintegrating it into yourself with this newfound power. Now, oh, I don't have this, anger in the background of my unconscious that's ruining my life. I've acknowledged it, identified with it, and now, or not identified with it, identified it, and now I am using it to empower myself because I've done this, that, and the other to integrate it in my life. Okay, so we have this separation. So you can see it like we have two separate snakes now. Now we have the two separate snakes, but the snakes aren't, like I said, separation would be, if you think of it, people tend to think of it like getting rid of it. No, it's not like we are getting rid of one of the snakes. We've separated, but now we have the snakes that are in this process of synthesizing with each other. So it's this process of separating, recombining, separating, recombining, separating, recombining. And you can see that reflected in this image. And I mean, you can see that very much reflected in the image of the Caduceus as well. It's very clear in this image where you have that separation, combining, separation, combining, separation, combining, separation, combining until you reach the highest levels of consciousness. So you can see that reflected in this diagram here. And so that is a very, very quick overview of the third phase, which is of separation. Now let's do that out of the way. Conjunction. Conjunction is a very interesting one. So conjunction, this is the one that Carl Jung was really obsessed with, is related to Venus. We like Venus. Venus is a great force. The morning star. And Venus is associated with, or rather, the conjunction phase is associated with Venus, which is associated with copper, which is associated with Earth. All right. So what does all this have to do with each other? Conjunction is about uniting opposites together. In inner star actualization terms, this has to do with the mirror self. It has to do with integrating your inner opposite. In terms of Jungian psychology, it's integrating the anima or animus. So in Jungian psychology, every male has an inner female and every female has an inner male. So conjunction is about unifying your opposites. For men, it would be unifying with their inner feminine. For females, it would be unifying with their inner masculine. And this is discussed in so many esoteric practices like the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Thomas, where they used in Gnosticism the image of the bridal chamber, where the bride and the groom are united together. This is all consciousness related. Jesus Christ kissing Mary Magdalene, showing a unification with her. That's where all this symbolism comes in, related to the conjunction, the unification of opposite forces. Now, I want to make it clear, in the Neogenian system, we don't really talk about it in terms of like anima, animus. We talk about it in terms of the mirror self, because we know that gender is a lot more complicated than a binary. Gender is not a binary. So, and it can be very confusing when you start to label certain things as male or female. Like, for example, intuition. Intuition isn't male or female. Men can be intuitive and women can be intuitive. Typically, when we're talking in terms of symbolism, intuition is usually associated with femininity. Not always, but in a lot of systems, it is. But we want to remember that these are just symbols. They don't literally mean that. It's just a way of communicating certain ideas. So in the Neogenian system, it's about, rather than being like, oh, I'm a man, so I have to integrate my inner feminine, or I'm a woman, so I have to integrate my inner masculine. You can think in those terms if it's helpful, but you don't have to. You can think of it in just your inner opposite, your opposite aspects of yourself. And so if we take a look here, conjunction, this is the phase of conjunction, is about uniting opposites together, which is about integrating the mirror self. And it involves balancing polarities like logic and intuition, sensing and feeling, introversion and extroversion, artistic ability and analysis. It's about not being a one-sided person, but a full, complete, and whole person by integrating these opposites within you. Now, Venus is a really great planet to represent this, because what's Venus is about? It's about love. And it can even be associated with like the Lover's card. It's about uniting opposites together. And we can even see this in the symbol of Venus, which is essentially an Ankh. It has the circle and the cross, which are very much opposite types of symbols. A circle is very different from a symbol of a cross, but here you have it united together in two, the circle and the cross. Copper is used because it's about connection. Copper is an extremely conductive material. It's a very conductive material, so is perfectly suitable for representing, connecting opposites together. So this is about harmonizing the conscious and the unconscious, logic and intuition. If you want to think about in terms of the masculine and feminine, you can do so. It becomes a bridge that's ultimately going to connect us to our whole self. We have this energy of harmony and love, allowing the unification of opposite forces within the psyche by making that connection. And what about Earth? Earth, is groundedness, essentially. So Earth grounds this union into stability. So we have this like idea of love and unity with the connective powers of copper, the flow of the connection into a very stable and grounded form. And in terms of our symbolism here, we can see we can understand it as the first coincide. You see, we have the two snakes. The snakes kind of make two loops. This is sort of the first loop of the snake here. The two snakes uniting together in terms of their opposite qualities. And thus, let's see. What do we have so far? You'll notice that this completes the elements, the element aspects of what we're talking about: fire, water, air, and earth. And you can understand this in a story form if it helps you. You can understand yourself setting yourself on fire to burn away all the impurities. It can be a very difficult process. Jumping into the water. If you're on fire, you're going to want to jump into the water. Falling into the depths of the unconscious, becoming aware of your unconscious structures, but it's kind of confusing. You don't know which way is up, which way is down. It's very dark and thunderous in a storm. Then you come up for air with newfound clarity, where you can integrate the dark aspects of yourself that you have discovered and swim all the way to an island, to Earth, where you can be grounded and stable to connect your inner opposites together. So this is the sort of story that we can understand through these elements. Now, we're making a very important switch here, where we're going from the elements to the spiritual. And the spiritual realm is where we're no longer dealing with the elements, but we're going to start to deal with the primes. So what is the fifth step? The fifth step is fermentation, and fermentation is associated with Mercury. So we have Mercury being associated with fermentation, and this is a very satisfying section because we have the planet Mercury, and we have the metal Mercury. I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but this is actually Mercury. You can see it down there. Okay. Don't touch Mercury. Mercury can be very toxic. So don't touch it. Don't mess with it. But this is Mercury, which is liquid metal. It's metal that can exist in a liquid state at room temperature. And we have the prime of Mercury. So we have a very satisfying and easy to remember step here, where we have the planet Mercury, the metal Mercury, and the prime of Mercury. And what is going on with this step? All right, so this is a very interesting step. Now we are moving towards more spiritual we're heading into the realm of higher consciousness now, essentially. So this process is split up into two. All right. So fermentation first requires putrefaction and then fermentation. And so putrefaction is more of a breaking down. And why do you want to do breaking down? Didn't you do breaking down over here in the calcination process? Well, here's the thing. As you start to, become aware of your unconscious and integrate your inner shadow and integrate your mirror self, what can happen at this point is you can start to get real full of yourself. Be like, you know what? I'm the master of the universe. And you are, we are together the Lord of this universe. We are God. But you can do so in a way where you're thinking in terms of the self rather than the whole. And this is where you see, like, in a lot of secret societies where people start to get real big headed, like, oh, I am the great leader. And then these little plebes, low consciousness individuals should follow what I have to say, because look at all the work that I have done. Look at all the work of inner growth and transformation. Look what I have become. And there's nothing wrong with being proud of your accomplishments. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Pride has a time and a place. It's fine to be proud of yourself. What the problem is, it becomes a problem when you start to use it in a way where you are negatively affecting others, where, for example, it's about thinking of yourself as a master over someone rather than a teacher. When you reach a certain level of consciousness, you're not looking at, oh, look at these idiots, I should rule over them. That would be a negative outcome. Instead, what one needs to do is look at individuals who may not be at the level that you are and go, I want to help them. I want to teach them. So essentially, when we are at this stage, the stage of fermentation, first you go through a stage of putrefaction. You go through a stage of putrefaction where you are eliminating, you're just making sure that your head is in the right place and that you're not getting into a very egotistical mindset. Remember, you don't want to destroy the ego. You just want to make sure, though, that it's not having a negative effect upon you and others and your life in general. So here, when we're talking about Mercury, we go through, putrefaction first, which is about removing any built up ego identification. And one reason why we want to do this is because the next step is going to involve the power self, and you don't want to contaminate that. All right. It will contaminate it and it's going to be a mess. And we'll talk about that in the next step. You don't want that to happen. So once you've gone through the process of fermentation, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. The next step is not your power self. The next step is your inner star. This next step, first is putrefaction, then fermentation. So fermentation is here within your power self. Okay, so so putrefaction is about removing all of the impurities that may have built up, the harmful way of viewing others through a egotistical lens. You want to break that down and remove that. Then you move on to fermentation. Fermentation is about awakening the spirit, aligning your power self. And so what is your power self? Your power self contains your hidden potential and purpose. It's in thelemic terms, like your true will. It's what you are meant to do. It's your passion. It's your true, when people go, oh, I don't feel like I have a meaning in my life, or I feel like I don't have any purpose. This is about discovering your true purpose. And this is where you begin to access your inner fire. So at this stage, we really are starting to work a bit with sulfur as well, because in these higher levels, you're starting to work with the primes. So we are really starting to work with both, but we have Mercury really defining this step, as Mercury is a very connective principle. And what it's doing is allowing you to connect with your inner power self, your inner purpose. And the reason why that you want to make sure that you go through that process of putrefaction is because this can become wildly out of control if you're not aligned correctly and you haven't begun integrating these other aspects. If you haven't begun integrating these other aspects, they can contaminate this aspect. And for example, just to use an analogy or some metaphor or symbolism, a well-integrated power self is like Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. You know, Gandalf is very powerful. Gandalf has a purpose. Gandalf is directing things, but Gandalf is very benevolent. Gandalf is very kind, is the wise old man archetype, teaching others. Sauron would be an example of a power self that wasn't well integrated, that got integrated with shadow, but not integrated shadow, just wild shadow, very imbalanced. When you look at Sauron, is Sauron balanced? No, very imbalanced. Has Sauron integrated their shadow? No, they're shadow possessed essentially, but they've accessed their inner fire, their power self, and they thus are starting to become tyrannical. So this is a very important step, and a step where you have to be very careful so that you don't start to run into issues. Okay. So this step is all about, like I said, destroying old or destroying egoic identifications that may have built up, putrefaction, and then fermentation, which is allowing the mercury is going to be serve as the conductor to allow you to connect to your power self, which is your inner power. And we can understand this as the second rung on the snake here, the second loop that the snake makes. We can understand one snake to be mercury and the other snake to be sulfur. And we're having the unification of mercury with sulfur. You're bringing the inner power self into consciousness. You're integrating it, because remember, mercury stands for your mind and your imagination, whereas sulfur stands for will directed towards higher states of consciousness and divinity. So you're unifying these two together, your conscious mind and your imagination and your intellect with that inner drive and will to accomplish your true will and your true purpose. And that's what this element is here. And we see a couple crowns. You'll see crown, like there's a crown down here, there's a crown here, there's a crown here. And this is just like, good job. Look at you. You're completing steps. They're like milestones. You get a crown. This is why you got a big one up here when you get all the way to the top. But so the next step is the moon, which is silver. Look how shiny that, you can't really tell, but it's so shiny. It's almost like a mirror finish. It's so pretty. And it just shows like how pure and transformed you're becoming. And what does the moon do? It reflects light, so it's luminous. And so this is also associated with sulfur. But remember, in these higher steps, you're working with both, but it's more about which one is taking a more precedent, is showing itself more in the process. And so in this particular process, we're associating it with sulfur. So what is this step? This step is distillation. It's related to the moon, related to silver, related to sulfur. And this is about connecting to your higher self. So while distillation here, the process of distillation is about purifying and refining your being, connecting you to the inner star, the unifying center of your psyche, the true you, the totality of you. And so what does this mean exactly? Well, look, and how do you connect with your inner star? Well, when you begin to harmonize your shadow self, your mirror self, and power selves together, your inner star is going to start to shine through. Because you've integrated your darkness, you've combined your opposites, you've found your purpose, and this is what allows your inner star, because see, these are all the parts of you that were hidden. They weren't integrated. They were your unconscious. So as these parts become integrated and activated, that is the inner star starting to shine through. And so we have that beautiful stage of silver and sulfur representing that remember, sulfur is about will towards divine consciousness. So it's really about connecting you to the your inner star. And remember, we're working with Mercury as well, so that's there. It's just more for sake of simplicity and ease and clarity. This is the one that takes prominence because you're connecting to your inner star. And so we have the moon reflective light, which purifies and brings clarity. And this is going to allow you to connect deeply with your true essence. And it's about transcending like the lower desires of your lower self to actualizing your true self. So let's see here. So we can see right here, hey, look at this. We got a big old sulfur symbol right here. I don't know if I know it's kind of hard to see on here, but here's the sulfur symbol is right here. There's the triangle and there's the cross below it. Because remember, that is exactly what the symbol of sulfur is. And so we see sulfur here. And if you could zoom in, there's something in the center of this sulfur. What is in the center of this sulfur is the phoenix. There's a phoenix in the center of this sulfur, which is beautiful because the phoenix is the bird that once it dies, it rises again. It dies in flame and fire and rises anew from its ashes. So the phoenix is a bird that becomes consumed in fire, the death of the old, but is reborn from its ashes. And it becomes something new and something powerful. And so this process here is about the total, transformation of the self, where you are connected to your higher self. You understand your true purpose. You have integrated all opposites within you. You've integrated your darkness, and you are connected to your inner star, your higher self. So this leads us. Some people might think, well, aren't we done? We're connected to the higher self. Isn't that what our goal was? Well, there's one more step here. And this step, and that's what's going to get us our crown. Won't that be nice? So this next step is the sun. It's very dark. You guys can't see that too well. Move the light a little. That didn't really help. It's the sun, okay? You can see. It's the light of the sun, which is represented by gold. And here I have some gold flakes. There are gold flakes in this. I know my camera's not focusing, but there's gold in here. There's gold flakes. It's not a solid gold cube because a solid gold cube costs $3,000. So unless someone wants to, super chat me $3,000, we're gonna keep it as some, I'm not rich, so we're not gonna have a full-on cube of gold here, but it is gold nonetheless, and it's beautiful and represents purity. And this is related to salt. And you might be wondering, what the hell is salt? Salt doesn't seem like it goes, but remember. Really, at this stage, we're using all of these. But salt is really taking prominence here, because if you remember what salt is and salt represents, I've shown this before. Here is a salt crystal. It's a beautiful crystalline structure. So you see how it's structured so beautifully. So salt doesn't just represent earth, or it would be earth. Salt does not represent earth. Salt represents spirit in matter. That's why, something with such a beautiful structure is that symbolic representation of spirit within matter, the spirit that structures matter into these beautiful geometric patterns. And so what this entails, essentially, is the seventh step. Did I even say what the seventh step was called? It's called coagulation, okay? So coagulation is the final stage where your integrated self, your inner star, manifests its will into the world, transforming your life. You aren't just connected to your higher self and staying up there in the clouds. That would be kind of like the hermit. You'd just be stuck up there thinking about, oh, wow, I'm all actualized now. But to actually manifest your will into reality, this is about will forming, giving form to what you will. So now that you have, your true purpose, you're integrated, you've connected to your inner star. Now the sun shines its radiant energy on the earth. Your light shines on the earth, transforming the earth, causing plants to grow, giving life. In other words, your power, your light isn't isn't hidden. It's being used to shine on the earth. And that's why we have the element of salt, where salt represents spirit in matter. So you can see the inner star, the sun shining the light, the rays of the light that hit the earth, nourishing the world. In other words, manifesting your will. The sun's radiant energy brings enlightenment on the earth, and gold symbolizes the incorruptible essence of the divine self made manifest. Because unless you manifest it, you're not going to reach that final stage, because it's just going to be all potential. You want to act. And this is, so many people miss the part where they actually have to do something and go out into the world and make a change and make a transformation. But this is about giving form to your will. And we see this here manifest at the very highest point with the crown. The crown, the achievement, the totality, the accomplishment of the great work, the final and highest crown. And one of the important things to remember here that I want to emphasize when it comes to these, and like I said, we're going to do, we'll probably do a breakdown of these in subsequent videos. This was just a very general overview. But I want to remind you of something important, is that once you're here, you're not finished. You start over again. So it's like a cycle. Because we're not in a single lifetime. We're not going to reach complete and total actualization and perfection. We're going to have things that are built up that we need to calcify again. We're going to keep discovering stuff about our unconscious. We're going to discover different archetypes. Our shadow self is going to be continuously need to be addressed and integrated. We're going to have to work on our inner opposites and all of these different aspects. Our power self, we're going to have to refine our purpose. Sometimes we may have to pivot, and continuously making the inner star more, reinforcing that connection, and then of course manifesting our will. So it's going to be this looping process where once you stop, reach the end, you start again, but at a higher level. And another thing, so you never really not in a single lifetime, you're never going to finish any one of these. Another thing to remember is that this is not set in stone. You're not necessarily going to do, it doesn't have to happen in this particular order. This is a logical flow, but it might happen in a different order. Also, it's not like, you have to integrate all of your shadow self before you can move on to integrating your mirror self. And you have to integrate all of your mirror self because that's impossible. You're never going to completely integrate your shadow self. You just want to get the process started. You just want to get it going. Now, so like I said, you don't have, it often won't occur in this exact order, and you don't have to complete each one to move on to the next. Each one is going to be a work in progress. So you could almost think of like all of them happening and having different levels of progress, if you want to think of like experience points or something in a video game, or whatever. But one thing that I do that is very important though, and that's when it comes to the power self step here, and why that step of putrefaction is really important, is because, like I said, it might happen out of order, but one thing you want to be very, very careful with is the power self. You want to make sure that you've at least started some shadow work and mirror work, because you just want to be very careful that you don't start to become like a psychopath, a dick, an asshole, someone that's starting to treat others like shit because you started to integrate your power without, working on yourself yet. And so you start to become an asshole and the complete opposite of what we want, what we require. And so, like I said, this is all going to happen, out of, not necessarily in this order. This is a nice logical flow, but it's not something that you have to stick to. But do remember the importance of keeping this step when it comes to the inner, the power self. You have to that's one you just have to be very careful with, okay? Because that's what can move you from being a Gandalf to being a Sauron. All right, you don't want to be a Sauron. Now, that's not to say that Sauron has a cool style. You can look dark if you want, but you don't want to act. You don't want to act that way, or else you're going to be a tyrant. You don't want that. So that's important. So, and because remember, this is all about symbolism. Look at all these symbols that we're working with. This is not about being stuck in a rigorous confining system. This is about learning symbols that will help you communicate what you're doing to your unconscious mind. These all represent archetypes. These are all images of archetypes, and you're giving them a symbol. And you're making a bridge between consciousness and unconscious. You're assigning different correspondences to these archetypes. And so it's creating this beautiful structure of symbolism that you're going to be able to work with. And later on, we'll see how, you can work with these in like magical ritual or things like that, where you're starting to work with them on a symbolic level, where you're making communications to your unconscious mind. And so when we take a look at this, we've seen all the various steps with the sun and the moon back there, and you can see it corresponds very nicely with what we learned last week with the alchemical tetractys, where you have the 4 elements on the bottom, and you have the 3 primes, and then we had the 2 principles in the one thing, and that's just, you can see, we have the sun and the moon back here, just guiding the process in general, and that brings us to, of course, the caduceus symbol, which is the medical symbol. And this has a important correspondences with alchemy. Like it's very similar to the what I just showed you. So you have, usually in terms of this, you have the snakes represent opposites. So they can just represent opposite forces in general. Some people like to say that one snake represents Mercury, the other snake represents sulfur, and the staff in the center represents the body. So if you're going to take that idea, right? If you're going to take that idea, then depending, there's different variations of these. So you're going to want to assign, remember, this isn't about what is strictly correct. It's about making a symbolic connection that makes sense to you. So for example, we have the snakes and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops that it makes. So that could be the first 5 steps. You have the wings that represent transcendence, connecting to your inner star. And the top represents coagulation, the salt made manifest. And so then you have the interplay of opposites, Mercury and sulfur, along the body that gains enlightened consciousness and is able to finally manifest its will through the final step of coagulation. So it's about making the correspondences that make sense to you. And so if this makes sense, if you think, no, something else makes more sense to me, that's fine. There's really no right or wrong with this stuff when it comes, if you're making up your own language, you can choose any sound you want to represent a certain thing. Now, if you want to communicate with others, if you want to work in a system where others are kind of knowing what you're talking about, then it's good to, kind of have a general system where you can have crossover with the different correspondences. Like, this is why we're going to see how alchemy, when you learn these symbols of alchemy, because many people have made the same correspondences, this maps really well to magic, tarot, and Kabbalah. And we'll end up going, that little alchemy system I showed you in the beginning, that case that I had with air. I'll show you how it all relates and all connects to everything in there. But hopefully that gave you a very brief overview of the 7 steps of inner alchemy, how it corresponds to inner star actualization. And in the subsequent weeks, we will most likely be exploring these steps in more detail, in more depth. And then once we do that, we'll look at something concrete, like a concrete ritual that you can do with the elemental system to begin to manifest your will into reality. That will likely be around the step of coagulation. Coagulation is about manifesting your will in reality, so we'll learn a method to do that, a will-forming method to be able to actually do that. So that's probably what we're going to do. I have a whole playlist on this, so make sure you check out the playlist. And I also have alchemy notes that summarize everything that I'm talking about here, available to members. So anyone who's a member on Patreon or YouTube, if you hit the join button right below YouTube, you'll get access to my PDFs that I've made available that summarize all this in a clear and concise way, so that you can have access to it whenever you want to help remind yourself of these things. So I hope you enjoy this, my friends. Take a look at the playlist and check out my book also, like I said, Psychogenesis, right? If you're interested in these topics, like, well, what's the mirror self? What's the power self? What's the shadow self? We're going to be talking about this as we get deeper into the steps, but this book has it all and a lot more, to be honest. So I recommend that. So thank you so much, my friends. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, DB, Nusalina, Dallas, Digital Tech, David King, LaDonna, Grace, Kira, and Val, and everyone else. Thank you very much.